Welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar hosted by the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations. My name is Victor Trinidad with NCPMI. This webinar is part of the Implementation and Scale Up webinar series. Today's topic is What Makes Great Teams Work? A conversation on engagement and effectiveness. Presented by Amy Hunter, Ben Reapy, and Angela Van Polen. Thank you very much, and please proceed.
Thanks, Victor. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'd love to have you say hello in the chat. Maybe say hello and where you're joining from. And as Victor said, please put any questions you have along the way in the Q&A. I am Amy Hunter, and I'm from Georgetown University. I sit on the leadership team for NCPMI and have, they're coming, New Jersey, South Carolina, Kentucky, Hawaii, Oklahoma, and they're coming so fast I can't keep up. It's wonderful to see you participants joining from all over the country. Hawaii, fantastic. I've been involved with the pyramid model since the very early 2000s. I helped to co-author the infant toddler pyramid. But today I feel so incredibly fortunate to be here with Ben and Angie, who have tremendous experience working with state leadership teams. So I will let them introduce themselves. Ben, do you want to?
Hi, I'm Ben Reapy. I'm out of the University of Denver, and I'm so excited about joining you today. We've done a lot of work with leadership teams in different states, and so I'm just really excited to speak with you and share some of the ideas and lessons learned, and gather questions from you and hear your examples as well in the chat. Angie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and I'm Angie Van Polen, and also with University of Denver and staffer in CPMI, and super excited to be here to talk to y'all about, working with state leadership teams and what might be some helpful tips and ideas that we might offer, and then also you, as you join in through the chat and whatnot, let us know.
Yes, just to emphasize that you're hearing it from all of us, please share your tips and your expertise in the chat as we go along. And of course, please ask any questions. These are our learning objectives. So we're hoping from this webinar today that is about an hour, we'll hope you leave with being able to recognize some maybe unproductive team patterns, seeing perhaps a conflict as a tool for stronger outcomes. We'll certainly be talking about some of the actual benefits of conflict. Usually it's something many of us want to avoid. We hope you leave with some ideas about how to engage partners more flexibly and thinking about why a process for decision making is so important and how to link that decision making to outcomes. But mostly we want you to walk away with at least one or two new strategies that you might take to have more effective teams. And go to the next slide. And so we just went over the learning objectives, what we were hoping you would take away, and these are the specific topics we are going to go over. And we're really treating this as a conversation. I'm going to be moderating and asking Ben and Angie some questions, and we encourage you to ask some questions too, and we'll have this be a conversation. So the first topic we're going to talk about is when you are involved with a team with a problem, or you're trying to understand what's going on, and you might be sort of spending quite a bit of time trying to understand what that problem is. And when do you know how to stop understanding the problem and when to start moving the team towards more action? So that's our first topic. So we've got a couple questions for you, Ben and Angie, and maybe we'll just take the first one. So every team spends a little bit of time talking through barriers or challenges. How do you know when the team has gotten stuck and is, as we were saying here, admiring the problem, really spending a lot of time understanding it? And how do you know when they're ready to move on? Either of you can jump in first.
Okay, I can start then. So for me, I'll start to hear some like repetitive conversations, that the same barriers might be resurfacing meeting after meeting, and there's no new like information, and the conversation just gets circular in a way, and then perhaps absence of action steps. So we start talking about the problems, but then we're not really addressing any way to navigate them and take action on them. And then perhaps an energy drop in the team, like people are less engaged or a little more negative in tone. And then a couple other things, like just in terms of like language, I might be looking for things that are more like you might hear like there's some fault in the way that people are talking versus finding ways to like move forward. So you might hear something like, oh, this is just how it is, versus like, what can we do about that? And then also like something I have noticed with teams is like, if we're spending 30, 40, 50 minutes on a topic without any resolution, that's something, or we've pushed it to another agenda for the next month, that sort of thing. So those are some things that I would look for.
Yeah,
Excellent.
if it feels like you've circled around, like everybody's circled around, and then we start to circle around again, uh, talking about the challenge, and it starts to get on a sort of immortal feeling, then you know that okay, we're not actually we're no longer this section of the agenda is no longer about finding solutions, about finding answers. And I might be starting to get into the second point of this. Angie, you did such a great job covering the first part, but like um, if as one part of your team expectations or agreements, if you've talked about this challenge that happens sometimes with teams where people like build an idol to to the problem, and you've been in that meeting before, we don't want to be that team, right? We want to be solution focused, but it is important that sometimes the admiring of the problem is also just people wanting everyone to know how difficult the challenge is, and so acknowledging that the challenge is in fact a challenging, that it's difficult to get a certain thing done is a really important piece. And then shifting, right? And then shifting to some questions about what are the next steps. A lot of teams that I've met with had really cool catchphrases that eventually like was like a trigger to like, okay, we're moving into this solution section. So things like small steps, great outcomes, the biggest hills have to require the smallest steps to climb. Like there's lots of different cool phrases that you can weave into your pattern. And then it helps people without making them without belittling the challenge of a problem to we're moving into a different phase, right? Things like um, what can we influence here, or what we're going to remain solution focused, but that's after you've acknowledged, yeah, I get that this is really difficult, and then after that, now let's move on to what are some of the possible solutions. But I've moved into the second section. Angie, do you have other thoughts on like what are the mind shift strategies, some of the questions that you ask?
Yeah, so I have some down here. So just sort, and I think of it as the reframing. So when we hear
Mhm.
something like why we can't versus like what we can do, so explicitly asking like what's one action that's within our control before our next meeting that we can take. Another example is like, well, this is really too big, and so reframing that or shifting it to, well, what's the next best step? So breaking it down instead of trying to solve it all at once, because that does feel big and heavy, but we can like step it out a bit and figure that out. And then like, well, this is like, how can we fix this? Or like, oh, this isn't our problem type of thing. And then like, instead of saying like, who can take the lead on this? And like, who's willing to put some time into this before our next meeting and maybe come back and give us some guidance around what that discussion is about and providing like a timeline and like what would it look like to be successful for the person that's taking the lead. And then the one that I think is really important is like sometimes we look at something and we think, well, we don't have the ability to do that, or we don't have permission to do something. But really, we need to look at like, what do we have the ability to do? What have we been given permission to do? And really focusing on that. So separating the barriers from assumed ones. So like,
Mhm.
what are the real things that are challenging and bumping up in front of us versus like, what are we making assumptions about?
I love
Yeah,
that. I was jotting down some of the little nuggets that you were offering and, just lifting up some of the themes that you both talked about in terms of, focusing on what is in our control and what's one small step you said. And, I love the idea of having a smaller group kind of tackle a piece of something and then, coming back to report. And as you guys were talking, I was really thinking about it's a balancing act, right? Like you need to spend enough time, sort of understanding the problem and making sure everybody, has a piece to say about it if they want to, or, really, not moving too fast so that people feel dismissed or they don't feel like they had time to, contribute to it. But then you don't want to move too slow because then you lose people who are like, come on, let's get action oriented. Like we need to feel like we're effective and we're making a difference here. So it really is, from what I'm hearing you guys talk about, a little bit of an art form.
Yeah, I like what you just said around like some people are action oriented, some people really need to. So I think another key point that you just brought up that I hadn't thought about prior to this conversation today, but have in the past is like knowing our like what are the ways that we engage as a member. So knowing like, am I action oriented?
Mhm.
Am I a processor? And like allowing all of us to show up in the ways that we do or what that we need to really.
One team that I worked with did these. We used a lot of the large post-it note things, but we would put barriers up and we would allow everybody in the group to get a chance to mention a barrier or identify a barrier, but then also everyone gets a chance to identify a solution, and especially some of the solutions that they might be interested in partaking in being a part of the team that I'm going to collect data around this, or I'm going to ask families about their experiences, or I'm going to help. I want to be part of the team that helps develop a professional development experience around this topic. So there's different ways of getting those, but like because we're all responsible for contributing to these things, then it makes it less. It makes sure we get our bases covered, but it also makes it less. You're you know no one feels like they weren't listened to or a part of the team, and so because everyone gets a chance to input, then everyone feels more engaged in the finding the solutions to those challenges. And it gets us past the like just like we're going to spend an hour tackling this problem, but actually we're just going to build an altar to it and we're never going to get off of it. We're just going to say this is an impossible problem. That's not a good use of 2 hours. And then that eventually you do get diminished engagement because it's just like we're just going to talk about how hard this is, and that's not fun.
Yeah. And so I think those are all great points. And on the next slide, we have some strategies that you may have already talked about some of these, but did you want to add anything?
I think just a general overview for what we've talked about. And again, like just making sure teams that you document your barriers, pair them with an action step that you can potentially take, use that parking lot that Ben was talking about, and then just naming the pattern to make it easier for you to notice and like redirect in the future.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's, I mean, just to once the one like if this sounds awkward, it isn't after a couple of times, and then it really gets easy to take on really big challenges. Once you have that, we're going to acknowledge it and then we're going to pivot to solutions. And it actually feels exciting to have like big challenges and to know we're going to come up with some really innovative, different ideas. And this is why having lots of different voices on a team is so critical, because you get better solutions the more disparate voices that you have in the room. It's not always great to hear, and we're going to say this again later, but it's not always great to have like your idea maybe isn't the one that gets focused on, but maybe your idea gets focused on a little bit here, and this other idea changes your mind about what's going to be effective. So having multiple different voices in the room versus one person coming in and saying, "Here's what we're doing," um, feels you all feel more efficacious, and you all feel like you're, a little bit the hero of the story. So that's always good. It's always a good feeling.
Great, super ideas. And I think we can go to the next slide to think about another aspect of teams. And you guys have started kind of hitting on this a little bit, but we were just talking about finding that balance between admiring a problem and really digging into the problem and the barriers, and then when is appropriate to shift to figuring out solutions. Another aspect of team effectiveness, and Ben, you were just talking about this, is how to include team members in really flexible ways. And I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like not everyone can come and join a monthly meeting. So this is um, a little bit parallel to the meeting. But how do we gather all those voices that I was just talking about? How do you get all this meaningful input? And providing folks multiple ways of being able to provide their input. Maybe they don't come to every meeting, but maybe they meet with, let's say with the three of us were on a team, and then Victor comes and meets with Ben later to share his input about his program or his school. He can't come every day because he's, running a program, but he can, he'd like to provide information this other way. Or there's a lot of different important ways of getting this. Do we have a language plan to gather the information of the families in our community? Like, do we have like that's an important thing to do. There like and what's really important to me is that like all those different perspectives, like research shows, provide better outcomes. You have more innovative solutions, you have better problems, and you hear about like challenges and barriers that are occurring only when you get that information from the families. And if you're not gathering the information from families, how on earth can you get their perspectives? You can't. So that's just kind of finding multiple ways of getting that information and then letting them participate in ways. And like Angie was talking earlier, there's lots of different like smaller groups or subgroups or whatever that people might be really interested in participating in. That doesn't mean that they are able to come to every monthly meeting, but like turning them down or turning them away from being a part of the project is a missed opportunity. And, if we're all working together really well, then maybe when when times are tough or when money is scarce and we're all still working together, maybe that other person is able to hold the space so that we can have the professional development thing, or they're able to bring the pizza. I'm always going back to food. I was from Iowa originally, and that was kind of my family's big thing is just lots of food. So like, who's bringing the food to whatever, like that person could help with that. Anyway, Angie, your thoughts on flexibility and engagement?
Yeah, I think honoring like everyone that we've asked to be part of the team is really important, and
Mm,
like what are ways in which that they work best. And so you might have someone that is a processor and so they want things in advance. So are we sending out things that we want feedback
mm,
on in advance so that perhaps if it's a shared Google Doc, they can provide their comments in there because that feels like the best way for them to provide versus in a larger group setting. So really just varying the ways in which folks that can engage. Because again, I think I just said, but we've invited them there to be a reason. We want to make sure that we get all the different perspectives, like Ben was talking about. So again, just checking in, like, do folks need one-on-ones from time to time to see how things are going? What would work best for them? Like maybe our meeting time isn't great, and maybe that's why some folks aren't coming. And so really digging into that, offering varying ways for that. Um, but really just valuing the folks and knowing like there isn't just one way to have people engage in a face-to-face meeting or in your Zoom meeting. Like there are other ways, and just being open and flexible to that feedback from your members.
Yeah, all the strategies that you both were talking about, I'm listening and thinking about what that says to all team members when you offer these variety of ways to engage. I mean, it really speaks to that, we're adaptable, we're able to, your input is important, and we want to include you in whatever way, however that looks for you, right? And so that really speaks to um, a message of your involvement and your engagement and your the way you are able to engage is important. And, I think that's an incredible message for all team members to see that, if their engagement has to shift a little bit from one time to another, the team can adapt to that because their input is really important. That's great. So I think we're going to move into probably everybody's favorite topic, right? Conflict. Oh, Ben's really warming up for it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, many of us avoid conflict, and we can talk about some really important reasons that make a lot of sense about why we might avoid conflict. But if we're bringing people together, and especially if we're aiming to bring a diverse group of voices together, we're human, and it's inevitable that there's going to be some disagreements and there's going to be some conflicts whenever we have humans come together to work on things. So conflict is to be expected. But I know you both, in your wealth of experience working with teams, have some ideas about this, and we've got some questions for you. So the first thing I want to know about, and I'm sure our participants would like to know too, is if you each have a time when the team disagreement or the team conflict actually made the team stronger.
Angie, do you want to go first? I think we're going back and forth with a.
Sure. I'm not going to give a state example specifically, but I'm going to. I think that when there's disagreement or not a shared understanding, it does encourage like perspectives being shared and then allows for a better plan for implementation for whatever that topic may be around. So we are trying to do systems change. So the lens I bring isn't necessarily the same as someone else's on our team. They're bringing a different lens for that. So we each have different resources and audiences that we have access to as team members. So we need to ensure we're looking at implementation from all angles and allow for problem solving that will get closer to our vision and mission and not just what works best for me as the individual on the team. So in my opinion, disagreement allows us to broaden our view when we might be looking too narrowly at times, which is an issue that comes up quite regularly when I'm working with leadership teams.
Yeah. Right, Ben.
I had a really kind of like a real specific pyramid-y kind of example where there was there was a team and we were trying to develop a practitioner coach training. It was like almost a week, several days long, and we as the team was pretty fresh or new together, there were very different ideas around what that would look like. And there was this challenge where some people are like, we have to get all of this information into their hands before they go out into the field. And other people were like, this is too much information and no one's going to remember anything. And how do we make this engaging and use adult learning? And there were very different it was like it was impossible to do both. And so and all of it was important information. And it was like this real challenge on like, what are we going to do? And again, we had this whole series of like what are our agreements? Like, we're gonna be respectful of each other. We're gonna give everybody a chance to share their ideas. We're gonna talk about the barriers. We're gonna talk about the potential solutions. And none of us got all the things that we wanted, but all of us got some of the ideas that we wanted. And we knew that like one of our agreements was basically like we're gonna have times when we make a decision, and sometimes the decision isn't yours. And that's okay. Like it was okay for us to do that. But what we came up with was we added things to our technical assistance to this group of people where we went over the course of a year, but it was through that conversation that we realized some of the TA that we were providing wasn't going to get their needs met. And we wanted them to have this sense of community, but you can't do that in a week and then never see each other again. So we started doing monthly calls and different things, and it ended up being a lot better process after all of the hamming and chewing things out. But it made our team stronger. Like we all felt more efficacious in terms of being uh, providers of technical assistance, and we also got I feel like we got a better experience for the people who were becoming practitioner coaches. But it required everyone to like put their egos in check and say, would not all of us have all the best answers. All of us have the best intentions for certain. And like, and having that is sort of like, we know we're in here for a reason. We know we all have good ideas, but we're going to like cam this out and go through this slowly in a process, made it so that we could get to a better outcome for the providers and a better outcome for our team. And also, an earlier thing that I'm not sure when I'm going to plug this back in, but like we would collect data on ourselves, right? Where we would say, how engaged do I feel? How effective did I feel about the pieces? But we would also have action plans where it was like, what are the decisions that we're making? And here's the decisions that we've made so we don't keep circling back to them. And here are the action plans. We've decided this is the TA experience we're going to provide. Ben's doing this section for this group of people. Sally's doing this group to these other group of people. That's we'd split it up like that. So that was the long example. Sorry about that.
No, I mean, I think it's really concrete and so helpful to lay it out like that. You're talking, what I'm listening or hearing you say is such clarity around process and how, people may not agree with the decision, but they feel much better understanding the process of how those decisions are getting made. And so I think that's a really fantastic point. I'm wondering about this last question here. If the facilitator, and I think I can resonate with this at various times, but if the facilitator is uncomfortable addressing conflict head on, do you guys have some advice around that?
I would say focus on the problem-solving language rather than personalizing any of the disagreement that might be going on. Because again, we're all part of this team for a shared purpose, and that should be our focus. And then we have to make sure we're not letting personal conflicts be the barrier to better systems and services to our children and families in the states that we're working in. But also naming the tension is usually less disruptive than letting it just sort of fester within your team. So, because it's going to resurface if we don't acknowledge it and address it. So I think again, Ben, you just sort of talked about this name and you recapped it a little bit, but like we know teams aren't always going to agree on a direction for every decision that needs to be made. So, again, agreeing to an upfront agreement to publicly support whatever decision is made, like we're gonna, they live with this sort of decision, and we can go out and support it in public. And again, that clear structure just helps reduce the anxiety so everyone knows what that is and they know to anticipate it with each time that something does come up that you're going to have to address it. Um, I don't know if this is helpful, but like some phrases that, as a facilitator that you can think about is, it sounds like there are different perspectives here. Let's make sure we understand each point of view before we're deciding and making sure that, again, gets documented.
Yeah, great. Ben, do you have anything to add?
Um, just that, I mean, I think AG did a perfect job there. I mean, I think there's, um, if you have the processes can help make it just a little less intense. And if team members need to meet outside of the group for a second, like we need to talk about this. This is a challenge that's occurring. Um, that's fine. But I think the more people can keep things above board, like we're agreeing to talk to this, unless I'm talking to you about I mean, I know I just said this, but like if bringing it up in a group, if people can't handle the conversation, talking individually, and then circling back and like having the group conversation is important. I know that there's times I've been in team conflicts where the people clearly had a conflict, brought it up, um, brought it up to a boss, and then you show up at the meeting well, we all know why we're here, and it was like I except for me, and then it was like I was like, oh no, like this is a problem. So that's not a great feeling. So having a process for bringing things up and just having a clear agreement that like we're going to bring up uncomfortable things as they go.
Well, and
Yeah,
yeah,
go.
to your point, Ben, around how it's handled really then creates the model for how future conflict is handled,
Mhm.
right? And, that's such a big reason why people don't bring up conflict sometimes is that they've had past experiences where when they have brought up conflict, it hasn't gone well. And so people bring those past experiences to teams that they're on. And there's a lot of other really sort of valid, real reasons why people kind of tend to avoid conflict and that conflict can be uncomfortable. People may fear damaging the relationship that they have, or they might fear rejection. Oh, people on this team are going to think I'm difficult. I don't want them to
Mm,
not include me, or I don't want them to see me as negative or not a team player. There may be on a lot of the teams, there's some power dynamics, right?
mm,
What are those unspoken rules around like, oh, that person is the boss, or that person has a funder role, or that person, is in charge of a big system, and so being aware of that and, really trying to create this psychological safety so that people can bring things up that they are concerned about. They can, try to stretch the muscle of, working through conflict even when it's uncomfortable. And then the more that's practiced and gone well, the more likely the team is, as you all said, to become stronger and then to feel good about being able to raise whatever needs to be raised, right?
Amy, I'm so glad you brought up the like power dynamic thing. That there's a lot of times when a person will have like unfairly, and usually in Ben's case, because of certain demographics that he possesses, like he gets undue power, like in a conversation or in a team or whatever. And other times when a person has that and is completely unaware of it. And so watching out for your coworkers, and when you see that they're being sort of skipped over in the conversation, that's why again I like having routines where like everybody gets a chance to speak, or Angie's thought, like where you might be able to put it into Padlet if you don't feel comfortable sharing it in other ways. And if you see somebody getting kind of like steamrolled by the power dynamics, that we've decided that we're going to call those things out, and we're gonna get better at them. It's like the food in the teeth, not the like you're never gonna you're a terrible human. No, your power dynamic kind of got in the way there, and it's messing with our team. Like that's a anyway. That's I think there's thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Amy.
No, it's a great example. There's a question in the Q&A, and I don't know if this is the right place for it, because it doesn't really speak to conflict, but it does speak to what you were saying around power dynamic and trying to create a level playing field for everyone to feel like they can contribute. But the question is, would we address the challenges and benefits of adding parents to the leadership team?
Oh goodness, they're critical. I'm so grateful that somebody put that in thank you for putting that in the chat. For so many reasons, having a member on the team is really important, and also like remember the other ways of like if you can get a parent center involved in your leadership team, so you can get multiple different family members as well. Having a family member though at the team really helps center the why of the work. And a lot of times I've been on a team, um and Angie, you can speak to this after. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot right now. Uh, there the energy changes, right? Where it's like where we might get stuck on the remember the admiring the problem. It doesn't feel good to do that when you're in front of a family member. Like it changes the energy and the urgency of like what it is that we're talking about. We're going to support children, right? We're going to support children, and we're going to prevent these really, unhelpful practices like suspension, expulsion. If you got a family member who's there, who's had this kind of experience in the past, or they can really, really shift it. And it is not always easy to get family members. So finding ways that they can engage, like what are the ways that they can engage and get their voices involved. Um, And that's just, I mean, it's critical.
Yeah. So I can tell, Ben, you feel passionate about the topic. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Angie, do you have thoughts about it too? And I want to encourage our audience, participants, please type in the chat your experience having parents on the leadership team and maybe some benefits that you have had. I would love to hear from folks who are listening. Angie,
Yeah, I think again, like there are different ways for members to engage, and I think having parent and family voices on teams is very important. I also have been on teams where there is like a family member that is present, and it is a challenge for them because they're not really sure. Because again, we're talking systems work at a state leadership team meeting, and that can be really challenging for someone coming in because we're using language that maybe isn't like understood necessarily for them. And so again, thinking about the different ways that we have access to parent groups, family groups, and how can we engage and get feedback through them in different avenues, just like it's not the same for every member on our team. I think families can engage in different ways. And so just being aware of like within communities, like who are the folks there that you can get feedback on? Does certain programs that you work with, do they have advisory, like family advisory panels and those sorts of things, and being able to utilize them? And I think, Ben, you mentioned PTI. So ensure we have family voice on our teams, but I don't always necessarily believe like a parent is always the best fit, depending on which type of leadership team we're talking about. But always important to use our resources to get their input to inform our decisions and create our systems to support them.
And
it
really,
sounds like
really quick, if you do have a family member on the team, like if you have somebody who's like their helper, like if we're that's aware and watching for when we use lingo that families wouldn't understand, that they're um or that they can connect with afterwards if they have any questions or have another way of it. That's another strategy to keep them involved, just in the meeting itself, but just the thought.
Yeah,
And
no, I
I'm
was thinking exactly along the same lines as you were, Ben, around the acronyms. We have a lot of acronyms in our
mhm,
meetings and a lot of terms that, whoever is new maybe needs a little acronym buster. Or, one of
mhm.
our agreements in the beginning is to, explain all the acronyms that we're using and kind of call each other in, when we're using those acronyms, just to help folks feel comfortable. And then you also raised a strategy that I've certainly had work, is having a buddy, somebody who does that
Mhm.
check-in, or who, can meet afterwards, or who is really having the lens on of how do we help new members, including family members, feel as comfortable as possible. And then there's
Awesome.
a comment in the chat. Parents and community representatives have been key for our leadership meetings in obtaining perspectives, absolutely, and feedback to step implementations within the programs. That's great. Great. So here you have, so I'm switching awkwardly around, oh, do you think we covered the stuff, Ben, on
Oh, I'm
conflict?
sorry. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we moved from talking about conflicts to talking about including family voice and parents in the leadership team, which, not the same topic, but I wanted to make sure that when we were
Oh,
talking
thank
about
you.
including different voices, we brought in that great question. So next, we're going to move from, we've talked about how to balance, addressing sort of admiring the problem was the phrase that we used, and when to move forward. And we talked about engaging people flexibly in the ways that they're able to engage, and addressing conflict. And next, we want to really think about how all of those pieces set the stage, or sort of are the conditions for us to make the important decisions that teams make every day. So we've got some questions for you following our format here. So I'm going to kind of pose both of these questions to you, and you can pick up one and then the other. But why does having real clarity, and we sort of talked about this already, but real clarity around the decision making, why does it matter so much for leadership teams? And then what do you do with the team that kind of keeps circling back to those decisions? And I think we've sort of naturally talked about some of these pieces, but I wonder if there's some other tips you both have around this.
Just really, to repeat what I did touch on this earlier. For us, we had decisions defined on our monthly action plans in the different teams that I've been with. And you also have a section for what are the action plans, who's doing it, when are they doing it, et cetera. And those would get sent back out after the meeting, and they would get reminded of like a week or two before the next meeting. And so there was time to, if like you had action items that you were responsible for, time to light a fire. And and then we would keep these things. And so when we were like, I don't know if we want to make this decision, we would be like, we've made this decision. Like we met about it like for 6 hours. And so the decision has been made. And then next year we can circle back and like we was kind of like an agreement. We made a decision. We're gonna at least try it out for a while and see how it goes. So anyway, those are a couple of but having a process for that where people can share information, make a decision, make an action item, and then move on. That's it made it easier for us because we knew we were going to get a chance to voice our concerns. We knew we were going to get a chance to share our great ideas. We knew it was coming up in the meeting because it was sent out to us before. So we were going to prepare our good ideas. But because of that process, it made it easier to know what was coming up. And if something just overtakes the meeting because it's just a dramatic, important update, then yeah, we'll bump it to the next meeting or whatever, and or we'll do it through email. But you felt like you had a predictable pattern, and that's always nice. Given the last 6 years, like I've learned that like patterns are really nice for me, and I don't actually like random wild stuff happening to my routines. Like that's not my favorite thing. Angie, your
And
thoughts?
most people don't, and I want to hear from Angie in just a second about this as well. But the predictability that you're talking about and the clarity around these processes that you're talking about creates so much safety for people so they don't have to worry, right? They can really focus on how they engage in the meeting rather than worrying about, am I going to get a chance to contribute, or am I worried about how the decision is going to be made, or how the meeting's going to go, or who's going to be able to have input. And, that's a lot of psychological energy that goes into things other than focusing on the meeting at hand. So I just really appreciate you talking about those really clear processes. But Angie, I know you've had a lot of experience with this as well.
Yeah, y'all have mentioned many of the things that I would say around this. And I think, some of the things that stand out to me is like what you're just mentioning. It builds that trust amongst the members of our team. So we will start trusting that the process is fair and it's not showing favoritism to one or a few. And again, it prevents assumptions for that type of thinking. But it also can increase the commitment from team members because they know they're valued and they know like things will be listened and heard. And again, they can say what they need to say, and their input is valuable. So in the end, like, I think it also, because of those things that we're talking about, it reduces the conflict naturally. So you have to, worry less about addressing the conflict because we know we have set ways in which we make decisions that everyone agrees to. And also, I think it just generally enables like better decisions to be made because we've surfaced more perspectives from our team members, and so we can hear more ways of thinking to make better informed decisions, if you will. That will also, again, when we tie this all back to like, what are we trying to achieve with what are our outcomes? And so, like, okay, so then what decisions will push us there a little bit further and improve those outcomes that we're trying to obtain.
Right. And you talked about trust, which is so critical. And in the absence of this kind of clear process, people do kind of fill in the gaps, right? Like people have to, say, well, gee, I wonder how that decision was made. Maybe it was because they knew each other better, or maybe it was because somebody liked somebody better, or maybe it was, people fill in the gaps with often what may not be true at all, but it's the best information they have in the absence of having a clear process.
Um, I think another thing, like it kind of leads into this other question, like when things keep getting circled back to that you felt like you already made a decision on, but again, it keeps bubbling back up. And so thinking about that again is just like, making sure that we're listening to understand the problem that has been surfaced. So making sure we ask questions and acknowledge the perspectives. And another thing I think is true, like good, is that like we're going to state what the decision is explicitly. We're going to document what that is. We're going to talk about a timeline. So we're going to agree, like, if we're going to readdress it at a certain point, that we all of that gets documented. And again, like if it comes back up, we are going to address it in the same manner and go through that decision-making process again. But one important thing that I would like to make sure like that we're building cultures around our data on our leadership team. And so like if we're going to resurface something and talk about it and think about what should we be doing, is like we're using data or evidence as part of our team to inform when we're revisiting something, to demonstrate the need that it needs to be revisited, and not just reopening it based on a preference from a team member. Like we have reasons for why we do it. And so, but again, backing that up with like, okay, so what's showing up in our data that shows that this does need to be readdressed? And it's just not like a gut feeling sort of thing. Some like expect exactly what we asked of like lots of educators, like show us the data.
Right, right. And we know that is a must-have of the pyramid, right? That we are making decisions based on data, data-based decision makings. And so Angie, you moved us right into the next topic, which is linking data to outcomes. And we can use our data to make better decisions, as you talked about. We can use our data to monitor progress. We can use our data to determine what actions are next. We can use our data to know, are we making progress towards the outcomes that we had intended for our team? So, we use data in so many ways. Why does it matter that we connect the data conversations back to the team goals?
I'll say generally speaking, I feel like data on its own doesn't move a team forward. So we're trying to move forward. So it has to be tied back to what the team is actually trying to achieve, or it just becomes reporting without connections and direction. So we have to be thoughtful about what we are collecting and why are we collecting it. So if we're collecting something that doesn't help us achieve our goals, then let's rethink about if we need it or not. Is there different data we should be collecting that ties to our goals? This is one of the reasons why we have a cross-sector team, and it's so important is because different agencies collect different data. And so what do we have that we can share and improve our systems that supports the children and families we're working with and make it meaningful and the purpose of collecting clearly understood?
Great. You know a lot about collecting data, Angie. Ben, what do you want to talk about with this
Yeah, no, I just
idea?
like I want to like highlight, yeah, I agree with what Angie said. And like when your team is using data to, further like what are our next steps based on that data versus like my score is better than your score, like like crushing spirits isn't the point of data, right? Like that's unhelpful. But like using data to be like make decisions, like we're all right, we've done this training, we got these scores, and we're going to make more activities based on this information, or we're going to have to move this other topic out and resurface this other thing in because that's what the data shows us. Family members, we think that these things are happening in a great way. Family members disagree. We need more information. Like sometimes the data tells us you don't even know all the things that you need to know, but like we're using the data not to attack each other, but to make good decisions and to keep moving forward. When it's actually used well, it's engaging and it increases like you're feeling like I understand the problems better. If it's used just to like we're collecting it because we said, or just to toot our own horn, that is less helpful. So like what other questions do we need to ask? Who else do we need to ask? Why are we asking these questions? There's a lot that gets into the use of data, but it needs to be for a reason. It has to be linked to your goals.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you both, I'm really thinking about how you use data to tell your story, right? How you use
Oh
data
yeah.
to like talk about the impact that this team is having. How do you use data to keep each other accountable and excited about the work that you all are doing? But what I'm really holding on to that you both talked about is like how you use the data, right? Like not just collecting data for data's sake, or like you said, Ben, just because we said we would, or we, wrote it in a grant, or we, check box, like we did that, but really like how you use this to create the story of your work.
Yeah, and I think that the creating of the story of your work means I'm looking at some of the other notes, like other multiple ways. Like there's got to be multiple means. It can't just be surveys every time. It just can't be evaluations every time. There can be conversations that you have. That's data. There can be, family interviews. That can be data. There's lots of different ways to get really valuable, important information. Sometimes it's qualitative, sometimes it's quantitative, but having that mix is what helps you to get the story complete. And if you're always getting the same picture, like I love that, like the art, or I like then it's not helpful. I mean, unless it just really is a sunny day. But like, well, like how do we, like, what are the other pieces that are missing? Like that data can help us uncover that. Sorry.
Oh, that's great. Great.
I'd just add very quickly, like teams, the importance of needing to interpret the data, not just reporting it. So what does it actually mean? How is it informing the decisions that we're making? How is it impacting our goals that we're trying to achieve? As well as like making sure we're disaggregating it. So like who's benefiting from it and who needs more support. So what is that data? How does that inform us in that way as well? And you guys were just talking about this, like, what are the real stories and real experiences? So it's not just about numbers, but it's also like these impactful stories that we can share out.
Yeah, and different people might read the data and have very different opinions of what that actually means. And getting those opinions on the data is also a really important part of that process.
I
Because
was literally just writing that down, Ben, both
yeah,
of you,
like
like, whose data is missing, whose voices are missing, like who haven't we captured in this information, who might interpret it differently. Like those are such great questions. This is bringing us to our closing. The hour has flown by. Great conversation with you both. I hope that you could each maybe think about, and I want to encourage those of you who are on to participate in the chat with this question.
please.
If you each, as you're listening in, have one piece of advice for effective teaming, we want to hear about it. So please put your advice in the chat as we're wrapping up thinking about each of our advice tips or our advice. We want to hear from you. So please type your bits of advice in the chat. And which one of you wants to offer some advice first?
Okay, I'll go. Since there's
Go, go,
silence.
go, 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 go.
Okay. So I'm highlighting like just being open to change, like making sure that we stay open to this change, because that's the whole reason we're on the team. So if you already had all the answers, you wouldn't need the team. And so real collaboration means letting the process shift as you learn more. About what works and what doesn't, and then set clear expectations for how the team will operate from the very first meetings. Don't leave it unspoken and assume everyone will figure it out in the same way. Be explicit. How will we make decisions? How will we handle disagreement? How will people know we've been heard? So naming this early just saves you months of like in unengagement and like people being quiet. And then lastly, the goal isn't a structure that works for the loudest voices or even the majority. I feel like it's the one that works for everyone. And that's a higher bar and it takes more intentional effort to get there. So, but a team that only works for most people will eventually lose those that were left out. And so build that structure everyone can actually show up in, and the team itself becomes the thing that makes the collaboration last for, through changes with membership and new hires and all of that. So just being open.
Auntie, you didn't give one piece of advice. You gave like 20 pieces of advice.
It was a closing thought in general.
Closing thoughts, right? That's the title of the slide, closing thoughts. Ben.
I'm just gonna highlight there's so many great chat box thoughts, and one of them touched on this, the relationships of the team, like having that is really, really critical. And so rotating roles is a way of making sure that someone doesn't, but it's really important that you you care for each other, just as you're hoping all the teachers and the parents and the directors are caring for each other. This is heavy work, and so you gotta like the people you're working with. You don't have to agree with them all the time, but it's important to have those relationships.
Yes, well, and you guys in the chat and both of you really spoke to the one, I was sticking to one piece, Angie, but the one piece of advice that I would offer is really paying attention to those relationships, thinking about how are people experiencing the team? Do people feel seen and heard on the team? Do team members feel respected? Do they feel, we talked a lot about sort of psychological safety. Do they feel safe enough to raise the concerns, to disagree, to see disagreement as a sign of a safe team, that they can be able to raise those conflicts? So my piece of advice is check in with folks about relationships and pay attention to the relationships of the team. Anybody else? Parting thoughts?
Are there any other questions? Yeah, I don't know if there's any I don't know how to do are there other questions that were in the box?
I know how to do the questions, and there are no other questions on in the box, but we do have 2 minutes or so. If anybody would like to ask a question, you can put a question in the box or in the chat. We can see it there too. And we even have a slide to prompt you. I don't.
And also contact us if you have questions later.
Yes, and as we really finalize, Victor is going to come on and tell us about how you get your survey and certificate and things like that. There is a handout that's part of this presentation that really lists the strategies that we talked about today. So our goal today was to talk about some of the strategies in the handout.
And there's more in the handout than what we went over.
Yes, we just pulled out a few for the time that we were together. So there are more strategies. Thank you, Angie. So I don't see any questions coming in. Thank you all thank you, Ben and Angie, for your great sharing of your examples and your wisdom. And thank you to the participants who joined us today.
All right. Thank you so very much to all of our panelists for their wonderful insights. Your feedback is very important to the work that we do. So please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar with our post-webinar survey by typing the web address shown on this slide into your internet browser. Your certificate of attendance will appear once you submit the survey. We invite you to visit our website, challengingbehavior.org, to sign up for our upcoming webinars, access recordings, download pyramid model resources, and more. Thank you to our funder for making this webinar possible. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.